Hello and welcome to my channel. This is a story of what if Deku had a flip quirk. Izuku's life took a turn for the weird when his quirk manifested. There was a fight between Kaken and a third grader who had a speed quirk. Sparks were coming threateningly from Kaken's hands, but they weren't big enough to do any big damage. "Stop!" Izuku yelled, running forward as the third grader became a blur of motion about to punch Kaken in the face. Izuku thought with all his might, groping for any quirk that he might have that would stop the rush. Telekinesis? Fire breathing? Suddenly, he found the quirk of the older boy, and without any hesitation, and flipped it? What? Izuku opened his eyes to see the boy almost comically slowed down. He was moving in slow motion to throw a punch at Kaken, which he easily dodged. The older boy, whose quirk had suddenly sabotaged him, gained a look of fear at the rapidly advancing boy with sparks coming off his hands, and he scrambled away. After the boy had gone, Kaken turned around with a ferocious grin on his face. "You finally manifested your quirk, Deku," he growled. "Took you damn long enough." After a visit to the quirk doctor, it was called Flip, and the quirk was weird. He could reach out to any quirk in a 50 m radius and flip its function. When he used it on Mom, he could make it so that she could push objects instead of pull them. When he used it on Kaken, it somehow broke the laws of physics and made the hot nitroglycerin explosion a cold implosion. His quirk was deemed useless by Kaken until Izuku explained how it was like Eraserheads in the fact that the shock factor was the most important part. Most people don't know how to fight with the opposite version of their quirk. They stayed on good terms after that. Later, he also found out that mutation quirks were probably the weirdest part of his quirk. It actually flipped the mutation quirk, which caused unpredictability. After Kaken and Izuku announced they were going to U.A., Izuku was on his way home when the sewer grate in front of him popped open, and out came a disgusting-looking slime. A medium-sized invisibility cloak. The slime muttered, staring at Izuku. "Are you a villain?" Izuku called. He really didn't want to beat up some random person on the street. "Yes, and I'm gone the slime villain started, but Izuku had already flipped his quirk. He turned into a solid red blob. That was strange. A solid blob makes sense, but why did he turn red? Oh, I see. In the color wheel, the opposite color is red. My quirk makes no sense though. How does my quirk take into account the color wheel if it is a man-made object? Maybe my quirk takes in my subconscious vision of what the opposite is. That makes sense because an opposite of something is objective, and mutter. As All Might jumped out of the sewers, about ready to shout his catchphrase, he was met with one of the weirdest sights he had ever seen. The slime villain that he had been chasing had been turned into a solid red blob that resembled melted plastic. The only reason why All Might could recognize it was the familiar slime shape, and the eyes which were currently flitting around between a green-haired boy and All Might in absolute fear and confusion. Said green-haired boy was standing over the slime villain, muttering incoherently, and writing in a notebook. It honestly looked like the slime was a test subject being studied by invasive scientists, and All Might couldn't help but feel a little sorry for the frozen villain. "Hello, my boy. I was chasing this villain through the sewer system, but you seem to have taken care of him. Though, I must ask, what exactly did you do?" The boy suddenly and violently snapped out of his muttering trance and instantly shrieked, "All Might! I am All Might! Symbol of peace himself!" All Might boomed proudly. Getting over his original surprise, the boy said simply, "I reversed his quirk." All Might raised an eyebrow. "You have a very," All Might said, finding the right words, "strange quirk, my boy." The boy snorted, and muttered, "You don't have to tell me that, All Might." "Well, can you unreverse this villain's quirk so I can capture him?" Sure, I guess." Aizawa Shota looked over his list of students with narrowed eyes. They all seemed to have potential, even that Hakagure kid who had gotten last in both entrance exam scores and quirk examination scores. though one quirk stood out to him. Midoriya Izuku. Quirk, flip. That's one strange quirk, Aizawa thought to himself as he read over the, frankly, inconclusive and incomplete description of his quirk. He hadn't actually seen Midoriya use his quirk in both tests, because they were useless on himself and robots. It looked like he had an interesting few years ahead of him. Uraraka walked up to Izuku, a bright smile on her face, which contrasted the grimace he had on his face. "Hey Izuku. Got any plan to help us defeat Bakugo and Ida?" she said. Izuku sighed. He just had to be paired up with Kaken, didn't he? Unfortunately, Kaken is on the enemy team. This means two things. 1. He will rush directly at me. Second, we've sparred extensively with my quirk active on him. That means that he will be expecting his quirk to reverse and will know how to use that version. The plan is to have me distract Kaken, and you hightail it to the bomb. If Ida gets in my range, I'll reverse his quirk. Uraraka cocked her head curiously. What will happen with Ida's quirk? It's a mutation, right? Izuku shrugged. I don't really know. Mutation quirks are the hardest to predict. I personally think that the opposite of his quirk is sprouting vacuums instead of engines, because vacuums suck instead of push. Any more questions about Izuku's quirk was drowned out by the starting signal. When Kaken rushed at him, Izuku decided to do something radical. Preparing for the blinding headache that would probably come after, he began flipping Kaken's quirk at random intervals to prevent him from adapting to his quirk change. "Izu, stop flipping my damn quirk!" Kaken roared angrily as he tried to boost forward with his quirk, but it instead turned ice blue and sucked him backwards instead of pushing him forwards. Izuku grinned and flipped it again when Kaken tried to use his implosions to pull his fist towards Izuku's face. Kaken, after a good few minutes of trying to use his quirk to no avail, decided to not use his quirk at all and fight hand to hand. He wasn't stupid enough to use his gauntlets, because the sweat stored inside would still count as his quirk, and it would just implode on his hands, possibly causing grievous injury. Izuku, luckily, was actually much better at hand-to-hand, due to the face that it was more important with his quirk. After ducking under the right hook that Kaken threw, he judo flipped the blonde boy on the ground and wrapped capture tape around his hands. After he left the fuming Kaken on the floor, he ran up to meet Uraraka, who was currently trying to rush to the bomb to no avail. Quickly, Izuku flipped Ida's quirk, and with a cry of surprise, Ida tripped, after his engines started to suck air. Uraraka, seeing the opportunity, touched the bomb, sealing the victory. Shigaraki grinned as he grabbed Eraserhead's elbow, expecting the familiar crumbling. Instead, nothing happened. The vicious smile that he had fell off. What had happened to his quirk? Sensei had nothing to do with this, right? Eraserhead, not wasting another opportunity, wrapped him up in his capture weapon. Now that Shigaraki looked at it, all the villains around him seemed to be having trouble with their quirks, and the Udata students were beating them easily. He spotted a green-haired boy who seemed to be in the middle, hands outstretched. It had to be him. Nomu, he choked out from inside the capture weapon. Kill the green brat. The Nomu rushed forwards at blinding speeds and tried to punch the green-haired boy, but as soon as the beast punched the boy, the Nomu's arm came flying off. Instead of regenerating, like Shigaraki was expecting, the wound kept on growing bigger, and soon half of the Nomu was gone, and it collapsed in a heap. The green-haired kid stood, untouched by the anti-symbol of peace. Impossible! Shigaraki screamed. You hacker! You defeated my NOMU with your cheats. How? The boy looked towards the quickly dying and disappearing Nomu, and then looked back at Shigaraki. It seems like this Nomu had two quirks: shock absorption and regeneration. I reversed them. Instead of the Nomu absorbing any shock, it instead multiplies that force, which is why its arm flew off. And instead of regeneration, I reversed it deliberately so that it degenerated. And your quirk now turns back anything disintegrated into matter. Grinning, he pointed at what looked like a white solid blob. "And that's your warp gate, Kurogiri, was it? Now, instead of a black gaseous shape, it is now a white solid. So, essentially, his quirk is now useless until I change it back." Shigaraki screamed and thrashed in the bonds, while Aizawa shivered at how easily Midoriya's quirk beat almost 40 villains in a blink of an eye. After the USJ, the school decided to see what effect Midoriya's quirk had on Class 1A. Momo Yaoyorozu, instead of using fat cells to create matter, her quirk uses matter to turn into fat cells. Tenya Ida causes his engines to become vacuums. Katsuki Bakugo causes explosions to become cold blue implosions. Shoto Todoroki, possibly the least effect out of the class. Ice turns to fire and fire turns to ice. Tsuyu Ajui turns into a gigantic fly. Kyokujiro, instead of AUX chords, they become mini speakers. The heartbeat that comes out of the speakers is quiet. Mashireo Ojiro, tail switches places to the front. Looks like a giant PE, nevermind. Minoru Mineta, balls become extremely bouncy to all surfaces, however, they stick to the user. Can't even pull the balls off head. Mizo Shoji, instead of getting extra arms, there simply are no arms. Koji Koda, only animals understand him. Rikido Sato, sugar makes Sato weaker, but mildly smarter. Achiko Uraraka, increases gravity by a significant amount. Fumikage Tokoyami, dark shadow becomes the user and Tokoyami becomes the sentient part of the quirk. Apparently, Dark Shadow had verbal control over Tokoyami, and forced him to feed him apples. However, in the darkness, Tokoyami had more control, and less control of his emotions. Eijiro Kirishima, instead of hardening, his skin gets softer and more fragile. Toru Hagakure turns visible. Hantasiro shoots tape, but they are bouncy instead of sticky. Yuga Aoyama shoots a dark and cold laser that actually pulls the user instead of pushes them. Mina Ashido shoots a dark liquid with a high p.h value. Essentially means that it is basic, opposed to the acidic liquid that the quirk usually is. Denki Kaminari pulls electricity instead of pushing it out. When touching a phone, it drains the battery at about 1% per second. Aizawa Shota strengthens quirk when looking instead of erasing it. Eyes turn green. All Might collapsed with exhaustion for unexplained reasons. Quirk factor seems strange, has 8 different pieces. Need to ask about that later. A man in a black mask and an impeccable suit put his hand on Izuku's shoulder, grinning. Izuku just stared at him. All for one, I flipped your quirk. You can't steal my quirk anymore. The man recoiled in surprise. How? How did you know my name? All Might told me the story of 2 brothers, one for all and all for one, and how his quirk could be passed, after I reversed his quirk, and he collapsed with exhaustion. Normal strength quirks aren't supposed to do that, you know? And my quirk can sense all quirks around me, and you're shining like a damn beacon. Not a lot of people have that many quirks. Izuku smiled happily. And I've reversed all for one. Instead of you being able to steal and give quirks to other people, now everyone can steal and give your quirks. All for one felt the familiar sensation of a quirk leaving him. What did you do? He screamed in panic. I stole all your quirks, of course, Izuku said, smiling with that infuriatingly innocent smile. All for one tried to pull a knife out of his pocket, but the green-haired boy just flicked his hand, and black crystals flew out and handcuffed his hands on a nearby telephone pole. You know, for the worst supervillain in history, you're kinda weak. All Might was looking at Izuku with a mix of respect and absolute fear. You defeated All for One, and stole his quirks? Izuku's freckled face lit up in a bright smile. It was quite easy actually. I was expecting some sort of villain retaliation after I easily defeated all the villains in the USJ. A man in a black mask and a suit isn't really low-key, and I could see that he had over 1,000 quirks. So, I flipped All for One, so that I could steal his quirks. So, now, I have All for One, flip, and all his other quirks. All Might coughed blood into a napkin. You have all for one? And 1,000 quirks? 1,349 to be exact. Aizawa-sensei, who had heard the whole conversation, looked like he regretted living. So, you're telling me that problem child, who was bad enough with his one quirk, has over 1,000 different quirks, and now can steal quirks when he touches someone? All Might nodded meekly. Aizawa-sensei groaned in his hands. I think it goes without saying that Izuku went on to absolutely destroy everyone in the sports festival. Hawks raised his arms in an exaggerated manner and grinned brightly. Welcome to the nest, he said happily. Izuku and Tokoyami simultaneously raised an eyebrow at the antics. Tokoyami frowned a little. Hawks, not to be rude, but why exactly did you invite me to intern with you? To my intense displeasure, my darkness was not enough to vanquish Bakugo, and I did not secure first place. Hawks smiled. Why, because you are a bird. We avians have to stick together. Izuku giggled a little at the incredulous look on Tokoyami's face. And I invited Midoriya because he had a lot of quirks, and I wanted to see why. Now, it was Izuku's turn to look exasperated. Hawks, you could have just contacted me. I would have been happy to answer the number 3 hero. Well, and because you both are wasting your potential. Come with me, and I'll show you the wonders of flight. Stain raised his sword, about ready to stab Ida, when he was simultaneously punched with a strength quirk, electrocuted, frozen, and telekinetically pushed into the wall. He was reduced to a smoking, unconscious form stuck to the wall with ice in a fraction of a second. Midoriya! Ida shouted in surprise. Why are you here? Izuku whirled around to glare at Ida. I'm here, he snarled, emulating All Might's signature catchphrase, to save your useless ass from getting killed. This was my Phi Dash. No, it wasn't. This isn't what heroes do. Maybe Stain is right about you not being a hero. Izuku shouted angrily. Heroes don't use their quirks for themselves. They use it to protect other people. You going on a revenge quest to kill Stain to avenge your brother is exactly what he would have wanted you not to do, he said, softer. Ida lay on the ground, stunned by the angry outburst by his normally calm classmate. Hawks flew in and cursed at the sight. Midoriya! Are you all right? Yup, he said calmly. Just a little Stain problem, but he's knocked out and incapacitated. I also removed all his weapons. Holy shit, Hawks said with feeling. The sheer power that the boy wielded was ridiculous. All for One really doesn't know how to use quirks, does he? I mean, he only used fucking strength to fight All Might. If he actually used some of his other quirks, All Might wouldn't have stood a chance, the boy muttered. The other schools in the provisional licensing exam came home with their bodies and pride bruised. The crushing of Udata, was Udata crushing everybody with sheer power? Sorry, heroes, but my daughter is a little clumsy, which is why she has bandages on her arms, Overhaul drawled. Bitch, I have a truth quirk, and it's blaring a lie. Tell me the truth, or I'll kick your ass, Izuku growled, holding Eri protectively. Deku, are you sure this is a good idea? Lemillion asked nervously. If you heroes won't give Eri back, I guess I'll have to take her myself, Overhaul snarled, putting his bare hand on the wall of the alley. Nothing happened, other the fact that Overhaul looked like was leaning against the wall instead of trying to kill them. Man, you supervillains really need to be less dramatic about this stuff. It gets really awkward in these silent moments after you proclaim that you're gonna kill me, and then nothing happens, Izuku mused out loud. What did you d-dash? I made your quirk useless by flipping it. Gave you a taste of your own medicine, really. I mean, you talk about cursed quirks, but you seem awful proud of your own quirk. I'll kill YAGH Overhaul started but got interrupted by a faceful of fist from Lemillion and flopped down to the ground anticlimactedly. Thanks, Lemillion. Izuku said happily, still holding the clinging girl comfortingly. Midoriya Izuku became something of a mystery on the internet and the students in U.A, and was the subject of many conspiracy theories. He had single-handedly defeated the League of Villains on a field trip, stayed on his internship, and defeated Overhaul and saved a little girl from being experimented on. And somehow on the way, he magically acquired more than 1,000 quirks by walking home, or that's what Aizawa-sensei had told 1A. It had become normal for students in 1A, or other classes, to talk to him to try to find his secrets. It seemed like any time he left the school, he got stuck in some sort of villain attack. Todoroki, memorably, started to froth at the mouth trying to figure out how Izuku got the quirks that he pulled out of thin air. Theories ranged from alien intervention to Izuku being a reincarnated villain overlord. Also, Aizawa-sensei had officially gotten a few gray hairs, and officially dubbed Izuku Catastrophe Child, a step up from Problem Child, after his fight with the Yakuza boss. He had to get his paycheck doubled and complimentary coffee in the morning and liquor at night to be willing to come back and teach a second year. The rest of the faculty lived in a state of constant fear of the Catastrophe Child, both for his tendency to bring S-class villains knocking at their doorstep, and the ease that he brought them down. All Might, especially, was terrified due to the fact that his successor had defeated his mortal enemy in a few seconds and now had All for One, as well as One for All. So essentially, the ending is Izuku is OP as hell, and the faculty and criminals are traumatized. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more content like this. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. See you in the next video.